Picture this. It's the same week, almost the same day, and two things are happening on two sides of a border that most people never connect. In Washington, trade officials from three countries are sitting down to decide whether the deal that runs North America's entire economy even survives the year. And in Ottawa, a heat wave is rolling over a crowd of thousands as the Prime Minister steps up to a microphone on the country's 159th birthday. Nobody in that crowd knew it yet, but what he was about to say was the closest thing to a direct answer the President of the United States was going to get for calling Canada the 51st state. A few weeks before Canada Day, fresh numbers came out showing Canada had slipped into what economists call a technical recession, 2 straight quarters of the economy shrinking. And within hours, the president was back on social media with his favorite 2 words, 51st state. Not a policy proposal, not a plan, just a jab timed to hit right when the country looked weak. It's a pattern by now. So when Canada Day rolled around, everybody expected the usual: flags, fireworks, a nice speech about hockey and maple syrup. Instead, standing in a field in Ottawa because construction has Parliament Hill torn up, with the heat climbing and storm clouds actually building on the horizon behind him, the Prime Minister said something that on paper sounds like a throwaway line, but underneath it is a direct reply to everything that had just been thrown at his country. He said Canada was built on partnership and accommodation, not assimilation and domination. Read that again, slowly. He never said Trump's name. He never mentioned the 51st state line at all. He didn't have to. Everybody in that crowd, and everybody watching from south of the border, knew exactly what conversation he was answering. Here's why that restraint actually matters more than a comeback would have. A comeback gets clipped, mocked, forgotten in a day. But a calm sentence about what a country fundamentally is, that sits there. It doesn't need volume to land. And if you're a Canadian watching your grocery bill and your mortgage rate and wondering whether your job in the auto sector is safe next year, that sentence isn't really about pride. It's about whether your country is being treated like an equal or like a subsidiary. That distinction decides who eats the cost when two countries fight over trade. So let's actually get into the numbers, because this is where the real story lives, and almost nobody laid it out properly. For decades, Canada has sent the overwhelming majority of everything it exports to one single customer, the United States. We're talking more than 3/4 of the entire export economy riding on one relationship. Sit with that for a second, because it explains everything else in this story. When 3/4 of your income depends on one neighbor's mood, every tariff, every social media post, every offhand jab about the 51st state isn't just noise, it's pressure applied directly to a pressure point that's been sitting there for 2 generations. And here's the part that actually surprised me when I looked into it. That exact vulnerability is the thing the current government has spent the last year trying to dismantle, on purpose, deliberately, using the pressure itself as cover to do it. Because think about who's actually running this country right now. Before politics, the Prime Minister spent his career as a central banker, first at the Bank of Canada, then at the Bank of England. That's not a resume line, that's a way of thinking. A central banker's entire job is finding where a system is fragile and fixing it before it breaks. So when this particular leader looks at Canada's economy, he doesn't see a spat with an angry neighbor. He sees a portfolio that's dangerously overloaded in one asset. And the instinct that comes with that background is simple. Diversify. Spread the exposure. Stop letting one relationship decide your entire economic fate. And that's exactly what's been happening quietly in the background while the headlines focused on the taunts. Canada has been signing new trade agreements at a pace that honestly doesn't get talked about enough, reaching into markets across Europe and Asia that it barely touched before. It's slow work, and nobody should pretend it's finished, because you don't undo 3/4 dependence in a single year, no matter how many new deals you sign. The stated goal is to cut that reliance dramatically over the next decade, a decade, not a news cycle. Workers in steel and auto have genuinely felt the pain of the tariffs already in place. This is a bet, not a victory lap. But here's the twist that a lot of the loudest commentary conveniently skips. A tariff isn't a bill sent to another country. It's a tax collected at your own border and paid by your own importers. When American tariffs hit Canadian steel or aluminum, Canada doesn't write a check, American manufacturers do, and that cost quietly rides along in the price of a truck built in Michigan or an appliance sold in an American store. So the honest question was never just whether these tariffs hurt Canada. Of course, they create friction, nobody's denying that. The sharper question is whether they're just as costly, maybe more costly, for the country imposing them. And when you factor in that Canadian aluminum, energy, and critical minerals don't have easy substitutes on short notice, the leverage in this fight looks a lot less one-sided than a social media post makes it sound. Now, on the very same day all this trade posturing was happening, the actual mechanism for renewing North America's trade framework came due, a review baked into the agreement itself from the start. And the result wasn't the clean, decisive outcome either side wanted. The United States chose not to confirm renewal in its current form, which doesn't kill the deal, but it does trigger a longer, messier annual review process instead of locking in years of stability. Both Canada and Mexico had signaled they wanted the extension. Washington didn't. Read into that whatever you want, but it tells you the leverage question is still very much unresolved, not settled in anyone's favor. It's worth being honest that Canada isn't negotiating from some position of flawless unity either. On that same Canada Day, in the same country celebrating 159 years together, two provinces were openly flirting with pulling apart. Albertans are set to vote this fall on a question that could open the door toward a binding independence referendum, and in Quebec, a separatist movement is picking back up ahead of a provincial election. A country negotiating with a superpower is a lot stronger when it's actually united, and that unity is being tested from the inside at precisely the moment it needs to look solid from the outside. Anyone selling you a story where Canada has already won this fight is skipping that part entirely. And it's not the first country to face this exact squeeze either. A few years back, Mexico dealt with almost identical pressure, the same tariff threats, the same "you need us more than we need you" posture. Instead of trying to win a shouting match it couldn't win, Mexico quietly built out trade relationships in Europe and Asia, so no single market could hold it hostage. It played the long game while headlines moved on to something else, and when the next round of pressure came, it had options it didn't have before. Options are leverage, that's really the whole lesson, and what Canada is doing right now looks a lot like a faster, better-funded version of that same playbook. So where does this leave things over the next year or so? Realistically, both things are true at once. In the short term, Canada still needs the American market badly, and Washington still holds real leverage because of it. The tariff pain is genuine and it isn't stopping tomorrow, but underneath that, the ground is shifting a little with every new deal signed elsewhere, every point of dependence redirected. Every month the country manages to hold itself together internally. This isn't a story with a tidy ending. It's a slow repositioning by someone who's clearly thinking in years, not headlines, and it is nowhere near finished. Here's the honest twist to close on. The pressure campaign from Washington did accomplish one thing, whether it meant to or not. It forced this issue onto the table. Without the tariffs and the taunts, Canada might have kept coasting along comfortably dependent, never doing the harder work of building real alternatives. In a strange way, the 51st state line might end up being the best thing that ever happened to Canadian economic independence, because it handed a former central banker exactly the crisis he needed to finally fix a weakness that had been sitting there untouched for 2 generations.